Hey everyone, welcome to the Canine Culture Podcast, where we talk about everything dog. Q&As with veterinarian professionals, rescue operators, everyday topics. We cover everything dog on this podcast. So make sure you subscribe to the Canine Culture Podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and make sure you're following us on social media on both Instagram and Facebook. Thanks again for listening. Now here's that next episode. Hey everyone, welcome to the Canine Culture Podcast. This is your host, Brittany, and today we are joined by Sharlet Jensen. She is the founder and the owner and operator of Speech Dogs. So Sharlet, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome. I'm so glad to be on.
So I'm excited that you reached out to me because you have opened my eyes to an entirely new topic, helping children with speech therapy and incorporating dogs into that overall framework. So I'm excited to hear what you can tell us about. And so let's just get started with who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I wanted to come on, because I think a lot of people are more familiar with the volunteer therapy dog handler teams that go into hospitals and rehab settings and libraries and things like that. But the role of a therapy dog in a more professional setting is really quite different. So, but I'm just as way of introduction. So I'm Sharlet Jensen. I've been working with therapy dogs at my private speech therapy practice for about 5.5 years now. It started kind of out of desperation. I had a child that had a lot of very challenging behaviors and was very hard to develop any rapport with. And but I knew he loved dogs, and I had dogs. I had one in particular that I'd been kind of playing around with the idea of bringing into the office on occasion. And so I arranged it with his mom and brought her in, and it was like for him a night and day difference. Now it's always not always that like magical, but for him it just made a huge difference. He was smiling for literally the first time ever that I'd seen him, and I'd been working with him for several months. He was chatting. It just really helped him. He built a rapport with my dog, and then he was able to kind of transition that to just having a positive association with coming to speech therapy. And then, over time we got, so that he could really trust me and do what I was asking him to do and take some constructive feedback from me. And I'm not sure that ever would have been possible without having that bridge of having the dog there. And so that's how I got started. And since then, I've worked with 4 different therapy dogs. I still have Delta, who was my first one that I brought. She's been working with me for this whole time. And then I've had another one who has retired and since passed on, and one who has retired and gone on to a different career. He's still with me, but he's doing a different job because he just wasn't thriving in that role as a therapy dog. And now I'm also working with my mom's little dog too. She's been coming with me for about a year. She's very high energy, not at all what you would think of when you think therapy dogs. Again, if you're familiar with the volunteer therapy dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just like to kind of spread the word about what's possible out there, and just the variety of roles that dogs can play in the health and human services.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a non-traditional use for dogs, especially with speech therapy. But my little brother was in speech therapy when he was younger, and I remember he would get so frustrated, or the flip side of that, he would just be so embarrassed, or he would be so defeated when he went to work on something and it just didn't work for him. And he would just kind of shut down.
Yeah.
And, once a kid is shut down, or even an adult, that's it. You're not getting through to them. You're not making progress. You're not really making it anywhere. And so I love that you're using dogs to kind of break through and not even hit that wall before you even hit that, allowing them to kind of open up and, like you said, build rapport with the dog being there. So let's talk about therapy dogs in general. So I think as time goes on, we're learning more and more about the differentiation of working dogs with respect to, we've got service animals, we've got emotional support animals, we've got a number of therapy dogs. And then you also, of course, have your working canines, whether they be like a narcotics dog or what have you. And so whenever you are talking about a therapy dog, can you define that for us?
Yeah. So, in a professional setting, the therapy dogs really come in and they need to be able to be friendly and calm and mannerly. But in a professional setting, they're off leash. So they have a lot, or generally speaking, at least, they're off leash. So they have a lot of more just independence in how they choose to interact with the client. And that's what can be really interesting, is to see My one dog is I call her empathic. She seems to just really know when the kids need her right there, and she'll, lean her body up against them or put her head on their laps, and just kind of be there to comfort them if they are having that anxiety. Now, my other little dog that I'm working with right now, she just loves everybody equally. She just wants to be a part of everything. And so just that happy-go-lucky nature can bring its own positives to the session. But it's a little different than the volunteer teams where they're going in and they're meeting new people every time. They might be in a new setting every time. And so you have to have a dog that's for the volunteer side that, just really, really happy to just meet anybody. Whereas my dog
Hmm.
can have that time to get to know people and develop that relationship over time, and also have that independence in deciding, how they interact with the kids.
Whenever the parents come in for like an initial consult or they reach out to you, is this something you discuss from the beginning? Like, hey, you have the option of there being a therapy dog here. Is that something you talk about immediately?
Absolutely. That's a huge part of the intake because I need to make sure that, first of all, there's no allergies or if anybody in the home is immunocompromised where it could potentially pose a risk. I haven't really had that come up as a challenge in the last 5 years, other than occasionally the parents will mention like a mild allergy. But more importantly, I want to make sure that they're also not fearful of dogs. And that can be a really fine line because I've had some kids who aren't necessarily fearful in terms of like a phobia, but they're just not quite sure. They either haven't had much experience around dogs or because of the types of kids I see, such as kids with autism, they might have some real sensory processing differences to where they're really interested in the dogs, but then just the dog comes close and it's just too much, too overwhelming. And so that kind of thing I can work with. We can do some gradual introductions or, get the dog gradually closer over time and have the kid, have some control, teach them how to get the dog to sit or down or back off, those kinds of things so that they feel like they have some control over the situation. But it's definitely a huge part. It's never a surprise when the family comes in that a dog's going to be there.
Do you find yourself having families reach out because you offer the dogs as part of your practice?
More and more so lately, yes. I do work in an area where we unfortunately are really short on therapists. And so I do have quite a wait list. But I do try to get families that are referred by existing clients in or siblings and things like that. And I definitely, some of those families that have been referred by, through word of mouth, they call up and they ask if I'm the dog lady, which I think is hilarious. Um, and again, it's always kind of playing that fine line of, the dogs are there for a purpose. It is goal directed having them there. And so it's not just, that it's neat to have a dog around. But I just have to be very open with parents that, sometimes the dog is going to be very interactive in the sessions and sometimes they won't. And then at the
Hmm.
same time, I do have some kids that just aren't that interested in dogs. And so that's great because the dogs get to rest during that time. It's
Hmm.
very mentally challenging, the work that they do. And again, unlike a therapy dog team that's coming in a volunteer team that's coming in for an hour or two visit, my dogs are there for 7, 8, occasionally 9 hours a day. So they do need those breaks with the kids who either don't need them that day or just aren't as interested to really have that downtime to rest and decompress in between more active,
Hmm.
um, more active interactions with the kids.
Right. So, what role do your dogs play whenever these kids are coming in for speech therapy, and how are they helping the kids with speech therapy?
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier, like that fight or flight response, where if you're upset or embarrassed, and you just get to where you can't really can't show your skills as well as you would otherwise be able to. And so that's a huge piece of it is just bringing those kids' nervous systems back into a calmer state through petting them, interacting with the dogs. With my kids that are a little more challenging, where maybe they need a really high degree of control over the situation, that dog can be a neutral third party. So we can do things for the dog. I can have the child ask the dog questions. Whereas if I was trying to get them to ask me something or say something directly to me or the caregiver, there's that inherent power struggle for
Hmm.
kids with certain challenges. And by making it all about the dog, it just immediately takes that out, and so they can just participate better. And again, building that positive relationship over time. And then one thing that my dogs are really do quite well and that I incorporate quite a bit is some deep pressure input. So having the dog lie on top of the child, usually on their back or on their legs, to give that sensory input, which can be so calming. And I can just work a lot of different communication goals into those activities as well. But that deep pressure input seems to be a really big hit with with a lot of my kids, not all of them. We
Hmm.
definitely have to make sure it's something that the child is comfortable with and that the child knows that at any time they can say enough and the dog will get up.
Hmm.
But that's been a really fun thing to include.
That's interesting. It kind of makes you think of a weighted blanket
Mhm.
and
Exactly
how,
what it is.
yeah, and you're even seeing that more at like the dentist and some of those providers are starting to use a little bit more of that, especially with children. So I love that you did that with dogs. My all four of my dogs apply pressure to me every night. I don't need it. They think I do. They think they're helping me. But when we go to bed, they all four just want to line up and I'm like, "Okay, well, don't need a weighted blanket." So the kids that are working with the dogs, and you said sometimes like asking them a question.
Mhm.
So is that normally what it is? You're having them either say a sentence, ask a question, or kind of repeat something back to the dog? Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, it really just depends what our goals are. And I worked with quite a wide variety of kids, but like if it's an articulation challenge where they have certain sounds that they have trouble saying, I might have them practice it. Often they'll like whisper it with me and then we'll turn
Hmm.
around and tell the dog. And so it just gets those extra practice repetitions because so much of that is just establishing that new muscle memory, those new motor plans for the sounds. And then likewise, if it's a child that needs help with the social communication aspect, maybe they have autism or ADHD or, just neurodivergent in some way. Again, we can practice those social skills with the dog and it takes that pressure off. Some of these kids have had, years of failures in situations with peers and, just other humans to where there's just a lot of anxiety built up around, practicing some of those social communication skills. And so by practicing with the dog, we try to, walk at the same pace at them or, turn our body to look towards the dog when we're asking them a question and those kinds of things. But having it be a dog instead of another human just seems to really take a lot of that pressure off and make it more fun, which automatically
Hmm.
makes it more memorable as well.
Right.
But also gives them those opportunities to have some success before we then transition it into a more, natural setting.
Do you have any parents that report back that the kids go home and like repeat or duplicate some of the stuff you did in your session with like the family dog back at home?
All the time. Yeah. And so
Yeah.
sometimes I will actually, if I know that the family has a dog that's, real cooperative, I'll actually include that as their homework. And then again, we're giving those repetitions in between, those practice repetitions in between sessions to help the child, learn the skill more efficiently. But then also, I'll also get like texts in the middle of the week that are just funny things that the kids will like blame on my therapy dogs. I had one child who was in kindergarten. He told his kindergarten teacher that she was really old and when his mom asked him why he did that, he said that my dog had told him that. It was just, just random. But again, this was a child who, had been quite delayed. And so the fact that he could talk about something that wasn't like here and now and talk about a dog that wasn't present at the moment when he mentioned it, that in and of itself really showed the progress that he had made. Funny little
Right.
things like that happen all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So for your practice, the dogs that you're working with, they're either owned by you or you said your mom's dog.
Mhm.
Um, are there ever or not ever, are there facilities that you're aware of that maybe like they provide dogs or they outsource dogs, or do you know of anyone with like a similar practice and if it's set up kind of like yours?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my dogs are owned by me, and I do all the training with help from a local obedience trainer, as well as I have a behaviorist that I call if I have a particular situation I need to troubleshoot. But there are facility dogs, and that's kind of a subset of therapy dogs that are owned by, say, the hospital or the rehab facility that they work in. Um, Not necessarily, but often those are dogs that are coming from an organization that specifically breeds and trains those dogs because they are typically in a work environment full time. So five
Hmm.
days a week, 8 to 9 hours a day. And so that takes a very special dog to be able to handle that much stress over a long period of time. My dogs come with me depending on, I only work part time. And so I have a dog that's coming either 1 or 2 days a week at the most. And that seems to work really well for my dogs. But again, every dog and every handler, professional handler is different. So It just
Hmm.
really depends. But yeah, there's facility dogs, and then there's therapy dogs that are owned and trained by the people who are handling them themselves. And then also in some situations too, even if a therapist doesn't have their own dog that might work well for the situation, they can contact one of those volunteer organizations like Pet Partners or the Alliance of Therapy Dogs, and they can sometimes arrange to have a volunteer team come into the session. That gets a little more complicated just because you have scheduling and you have, privacy and depending on what the client's needs are. But it's that's called the diamond model, as opposed to the triangle model where I'm the one handling the dog and working with the child. But that having that volunteer team come in is also a possibility as well.
We had a facility dog on maybe 2 years ago on the podcast. He worked at a hospital. Gosh, I'm blanking on where that hospital was. It might have been in Texas. But yeah, he was trained by one of those organizations and he would come in and work like little shifts at the hospital and kind of like visit the patients that were in there. And I think he had a specialty. It's just interesting how much we can use dogs for, and I love to see people using dogs for their full potential and giving dogs, something to do. A lot of dogs really enjoy the work that they get, and so I know for so many breeds that would be so helpful.
Yeah.
Um, on your website, so speechdogs.com, you have a handful of resources from you've got a course on there, you've got a blog, you've got some FAQs. Talk to us a little bit about what your website offers and who that kind of caters to.
Yeah. Because this was something that was so powerful in my therapy practice, it just really changed how I approach therapy, especially with those challenging kids. But I really saw it carry over to even my kids that, maybe a therapy dog wasn't necessary, but I could see some benefits from having them there. I just really wanted to share with other speech therapists in particular, but just professionals in general. This is something that they could benefit from. If they love animals and they have, a client population that loves animals, it can be a really great fit. And at the time I started, there really wasn't much information out there that was like concrete how-to information. There was lots of theory on the power of the human-animal bond and things like that as to why having a therapy dog present can be so powerful. But when you actually needed the nitty-gritty of like, okay, what do I need to do to get started, and how do I keep this safe and keep those interactions positive for the dog as well, it was harder to find information. And so that's why I started the website. So yes, so I've got a free roadmap for starting with a speech therapy dog. Everything that's on my site is like geared towards speech therapists, but 80-90% of the information is going to apply regardless of your field that you're working in. And then I do have a course. I have a book as well called Pause for Progress, Integrating Animal Assisted Intervention into Your Speech Language Pathology Practice. And again, that book, most of the information is going to apply regardless of your setting. And so as I was going through the process of writing the book and getting that published, more and more has become available for professional therapy dogs and their handlers. We now have the Association of Animal Assisted Intervention Professionals, or AAIP, and they've been around like 3 years, I think now, and they're doing a great job of getting education out there. And there's just a lot more networking I'm seeing happening, and more, webinars and podcasts and things like that, to where we are able to kind of have a community that can share ideas and share, what works and what doesn't work. And so that's been a really positive change. I think we're going to continue to see therapy dogs just really rise in popularity over the next few years, because we're seeing so much anxiety, and mental health challenges in the population just in general, but specifically in kids too. And it just makes it so hard to address, for me, like I'm trying to address communication goals, but I can't even start on that if I have a child who isn't able to, be calm and present and in a learning state of mind.
Right. So you mentioned AAIP or
Triple
AAAIP,
AIP, yes.
triple AIP. Oh, that's rough. If you were to go to their website, would you be able to find other practitioners like in your specific area? Like if someone, they're not where you're at and maybe they wanted to find something similar, would that be a good resource for them?
Yeah, it would be a great resource for them as well. And they do have So I know they're updating their website. I think it's going to launch here pretty soon. So I don't know exactly how it's going to be set up, but there is like a Facebook group as well. I know that's been really helpful for me to be able to just kind of network with other people with similar interests. But they do have monthly webinars that are either free if you're a member or very low cost. So if it's something that you're just kind of interested in seeing if this might be a good fit for you, some of those webinars might be interesting. They have courses. I did go through their certification process. So I am a certified animal assisted intervention specialist through AAAIP. And then I also, both of my dogs and I went through their team handlers or team skills evaluation to assess our working relationship as a handler therapy dog team. And that allowed us to get to be eligible for a special liability insurance policy, which was really helpful too, because that's always a huge question too when we're bringing an animal, a live animal, into a setting. Obviously, there's a lot that goes on prior to that in making sure that the animal's temperament is a good fit for the situation, and that we're, educating our clients on how to handle our dogs, as much as possible. But you just never know. We work with impulsive kids, and there's always unpredictability there. So being able to have that professional liability has been really a game changer, I think, for just the field of animal assisted intervention as a whole.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any advice or tips for maybe it's parents who they can't find someone that's doing something similar to you, but maybe they have a family dog at home? Is there any advice for allowing them or helping them, integrate that dog into their child's speech therapy or just general socialization?
Yeah, I think it depends so much on the individual dog too, because of course we want to make sure that we're respecting that dog's communications if they are uncomfortable with something that the child is doing or something that the handler is doing. But definitely just even talking, if the child's in therapy, talking with their therapist and say, hey, do you have any ideas for how we could carry this over to our pet at home? And then even just having the child be in charge of some of those chores for the dog too can be so powerful and so just motivating for the child to apply whatever skills they're working on, whether that's, speech skills or fine motor skills. I find the dogs can be such a powerful driver for kids to want to do things, to try things that are hard.
Well, Sharlet, this has been very helpful, very informative. For anyone that's wondering, will you tell everyone your website again, and then also any of your social media platforms?
Sure. So it's speechdogs.com. And again, I've got lots of resources on there. I also have a contact form on there as well. So don't hesitate to email me if you've got specific questions or just want to kind of share where you're at in your therapy dog journey as well. And then I'm on Instagram. It's at speech_dogs. I also do have a YouTube channel as well that's also at speech_dogs. So I've got some basic videos there, as well as I do on the YouTube channel have a 1-hour just introduction to animal assisted interventions as well. So again, if you're just kind of interested in the idea and don't quite know where to get started, that could be a great resource for you as well. And then again, I always recommend AAAIP. I'm not associated with them other than that I am a member, but I've just found their resources to be so helpful. And again, just being able to find other professionals that are doing similar things and network with them has been just really empowering, and I think is really helping to just drive the field forward in terms of both keeping our therapy animals' welfare in mind, but also exploring kind of what are the limits of what we can do with our animals.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for sharing. I'm excited for the listeners to get a hold of this episode and just appreciate the work you're doing. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to the Canine Culture Podcast. Please make sure you subscribe to the Canine Culture Podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and make sure you're following us on social media. If you have any recommendations, any topics that you'd like to hear, if you know of any guests that would be good for the show, or if you yourself want to be a guest, please reach out to us. Send us an email at canineculturepodcast@gmail.com or send us a direct message on social media. Thank you for listening, and please share this with any of your dog-loving friends.